Welcome back. You're watching The Big Idea. Now, in a changing landscape of immigration laws in South Africa, businesses should have a long-term strategy for employing foreign nationals. This approach is said to prohibit visa processing delays, which can hinder business projects, ensure legal compliance, and enable seamless workforce integration. Joining me now to delve deeper into this in greater detail is Loren Landau from the African Center for Migration and Society Department of the University of the Witwatersrand. Lawrence, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today.
I'm pleased to be here.
Brilliant, Lawrence. So as we say, we are seeing quite a few pieces of legislation trying to be pushed through here when it comes to immigration laws in South Africa. But based on your knowledge and also just having seen and looked at immigration laws throughout the world, how is South Africa really faring in terms of creating a seamless process that is equitable, but also that, suits the needs of the country?
Right. I think there's many issues, and obviously we know South Africa is struggling economically in many ways. And I think that there's a few things that are going on. I mean, one is the basic implementation of any law that we have, and that relies on the Department of Home Affairs, which is notoriously and has been for the last 30 years a major obstacle for companies trying to recruit foreign labor, especially skilled foreign labor. We also have an issue of what skills we actually need and how that fits into our domestic transformation objectives. So right now, the country desperately needs skills in high-tech areas, in teaching, even in medicine. But we're trying to create incentives for those jobs to go to South Africans, which is a good thing. So some of the laws are not quite in line, probably, with our needs. And then there is, of course, the sort of prevailing anti-immigrant sentiment and regulations within the labor market, which make it very difficult for companies, even if they need foreign labor and even if they actively try to recruit domestically, to actually hire and to try to bring in the skills that they need.
I want us to actually break these down one by one, maybe starting off with the issue of skills, trying to balance the fact that, of course, we have this high unemployment, Lawrence. As you say, we have to find a way to employ as many South Africans as possible. But the truth of the matter is that we don't have all the skills that we need, and to remain globally competitive, it's important to bring on a foreign workforce there to just assist in that regard. But what kind of skills are we talking about versus what we're putting out feelers for? Is there a mismatch happening here? Are we not quite getting the right data? What aren't we getting in terms of being able to accurately say and recruit for the skills we need?
Right. I mean, I think there is an issue of what, as I was saying, is exactly what those skills are, and it depends who you speak to, right? I think if you talk to companies that are working construction, they'll say they need foreign skills from everywhere, from construction workers, artisans, electricians, plumbers, all the way up to the structural engineers and business managers. A lot of times that's a preference. It's saying we'd rather have foreigners than South Africans because they're easier to work with, because they don't make demands in terms of labor conditions. But there is an issue of what skills are just not in the country, and that just simply can't be recruited. And what we're really suffering for here is the failure of the basic education system, the weakness of higher education, particularly in skills that require high levels of numeracy, so engineering, sort of even some levels of accountancy, business management, various things around technology, technological management, IT systems. These are really areas where we're struggling. Also, sort of chemistry, physics, these kind of high-level skills are largely absent in the country, or very, very expensive to get if you hire domestically. Can we attract those people, I think, is a whole other issue. South Africa offers a lot, but those people are also in demand globally. So we do need to make the system very attractive to them, and the obstacles that they face to getting into South Africa and getting recruited are still very high.
You also mentioned anti-immigrant sentiments in the labor market. Help us understand what you make reference to here.
Right. I think that there is, many companies recognize that immigration is a big political issue right now. It's front and center in the current presidential national elections. And so hiring foreigners is, even if they have the skills that you need, it may not be the politically right thing to do. If you're a public company, if you're a company that people are watching, putting a foreign face in the front office, bringing a foreigner into the company when there are South Africans competing potentially for the same jobs may not be the right thing to do politically. And I think this works against companies sometimes bringing in skills that would help the company be productive, would help them actually create jobs for South Africans in the long term. But politically, it's hard. We've heard about HR departments, which are often themselves quite xenophobic and make it difficult to get appointments through. That's something that we've faced at the university ourselves. So these things are all calculations that businesses are making when they look to recruit.
Another interesting one, I think, for South Africa, Lawrence, that here is that, we have very porous borders, I think, at this point. And it's also very important maybe to note that we don't necessarily have good immigrant processing. And that is also leading to tensions with foreign nationals here in South Africa at all levels, maybe with, more unskilled labor, looking at waitresses and the likes, but also, I think, in more senior roles here. And so what it does end up happening is, they kind of all feed into this sentiment that South Africans isn't welcoming of foreign nationals there. And as you say, deeply politicized. But anytime something becomes deeply politicized, it can also be misconstrued. It can lead to a lot of illogical policies emerging there. And I'm keen to get your thoughts on how we are taking in or handling these nuances as a country.
Right. I think it's a very important distinction to make between people who are coming over the border who are not universally unskilled. I mean, a lot of them are also quite skilled or are skilled artisans, maybe not the engineers and the physicists, but there are people who would be bringing skills that way. And there are a lot of people coming as refugees who may be medical professionals, other things that South Africa might need. But you're absolutely right that sense that South Africa has been overwhelmed by these numbers has broadened the sort of hostility to everyone and maybe clouded the calculations about actually bringing in highly skilled people through highly formalized systems with permits and lots of checks might actually help us grow the South African economy. I know a lot of businesses are unwilling or reluctant to invest or to try to grow their operations in South Africa because they know they may not get the skills they need. And if they don't grow their production, well, those are jobs that South Africans would get eventually. So I think there is a need to make this distinction. The Border Management Agency is supposed to help us manage the border a bit more efficiently, try to filter out the people that have a right to come in versus those who don't. As I mentioned before, we do need Home Affairs to also come to the party in terms of processing work permits and these kind of applications so that the people we want can come in with the permits that they need.
What is also interesting, Lawrence, is the fact that around the world, due to, I guess, tensions, inequalities, people are moving. We are seeing people moving into Africa, into Southeast Asia, into more developed markets and around the world here. And when I think of South Africa as a destination for people to come and take a refuge or even to come and build a life here, I'm wondering if we are still, managing our reputation globally to welcome that kind of environment, or are we becoming a country that is perceived as so hostile that we can't be seen as a place of refuge for many people, considering that in our past many South Africans went and took refuge in other places?
Right. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, we do look, especially at the highly skilled level, it's a global marketplace for skilled labor. There are maybe 1 million or more South Africans now working in the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia. They're also looking for opportunities, and the same will go, in other directions. South Africa, I think, has taken a few knocks. Brand South Africa has taken a few knocks, particularly on the African continent. The country is still very welcoming if you're a wealthy retiree coming in from Europe, from the United States, from Australia, and you bring a few $100,000 or $1 million and buy a house in Cape Town or outside of Durban. You're still welcome. You can still have an extraordinary quality of life. It's still quite easy. But I think if we're talking about recruiting highly skilled people from Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Zimbabwe, even Mozambique, this is very hard. And I think I have heard many Africans who in the past would have been excited to come and work in South Africa, now giving a second thought, knowing that at the workplace they might face discrimination, they have to get through Home Affairs, that maybe this is not where they want to be. And that's unfortunate because those are also big markets for South African goods, and hurting brand South Africa in those countries is a problem for labor, but also for just general for production.
Also the South African government issued a very lengthy white paper on issues of immigration here, Loren. I'm keen to talk about this white paper from your perspective. Are we at least at government level having the right thinking towards resolving these issues? They are layered, they're deeply political, they're very polarizing, but are we thinking about immigration and matters of skills and policies clearly as a country at this point?
There's a lot in that white paper, and as you say, it's a big document. It covers a lot of space. There's one thing that I absolutely agree with, which is that there is a need to revisit South Africa's immigration and asylum policies, its citizenship laws. Those haven't really been looked at seriously since the 90s or early 2000s. South Africa is a different country than it was then. The economy has shifted for better or worse. There is an issue, though, of how the government is reframing this issue. And for the most part, and most of this document is about the threats that immigration poses to South Africa, whether it's economic, whether it's in terms of terrorism, whether it's in terms of crime, smuggling, etc. There is a small section in the discussion about how immigration can promote South African development, jobs, business, investment, etc. And that part is fairly well undeveloped, let's say. It relies on the presumption that lots of people want to come. It doesn't address the social administrative issues that we need to address to bring those people in. It does recognize, however, although probably not enough, that South Africa has acute skills shortages in many areas that require high levels of education and training. And maybe it opens the space for recruitment of people like that into the country. A lot of that will depend on the regulations that follow, if it's implemented, how it's implemented, is the administrative capacity there, and whether South Africa remains peaceful and stable and electrified enough to actually recruit people to come.
I must also ask you about, ticking the box in terms of possibly getting a skilled individual into South Africa. They get, let's say, Lawrence, they get all the documents they need, box ticked, and they're happy to work here. A second layer of complexity in South Africa becomes the spouses, children of skilled individuals also coming through here. Another place where we could be shooting ourselves in the foot. Are we speaking enough about that layer, or are we still focused on the skilled individual and not the ecosystem that really kind of gives rise to the individual?
Right. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know all of the sort of very specific regulations about who can come and which permits entitle a spouse or a child. Yeah. I think we do have issues around nationality. So if you have a child who's born in South Africa, it's very difficult. If one of the parents is not South African, it's very difficult for them to get citizenship. It's very difficult for them to stay. Moving from a work permit or a highly skilled work permit to permanent residence and to citizenship is something that's practically very difficult, even if the law allows it. And so if people are thinking about where are we going to make our lives, where would we have children, where would we want to invest, a lot of those laws are not really aligned to that. Many of the recruitment strategies and the legal frameworks are to bring in people temporarily to fill a skills gap, and then hopefully to train a South African to take that job. And while that's admirable, it does make it less attractive, for someone coming in. If they're thinking, look, we can stay here, my spouse may not be able to work. The schools in this area will require us to pay for private school fees. That's not subsidized. So where really is this the life that I want? We will attract people for sure, but as you say, it may not be the people we want, and they may not invest as much in South Africa as we would like.
You also touched earlier on the issue of just incentivizing people to look at South Africa more favorably here. And I think you've mentioned some, subsidization, with tax breaks here, even how South Africa tells its story globally and the perception here. But could we also be, incentivizing people to stay in South Africa? And I'm wondering, from a perspective of South Africans leaving, going to other places here, another part of, immigration or migration that we're not quite getting right.
Well, I think keeping South Africans and keeping skilled South Africans in the country is first prize. I mean, as someone who's worked in many countries, I think it's good that South Africans travel. I think it's good, especially if they can work across the continent and build those kind of connections, which are not there yet. We have strong connections with the US, the UK, Australia, not so much in the continent, but we do want to keep those skills. If we invest in people's education, medicine is still highly subsidized, higher education is still highly subsidized. That's taxpayer money that's going and is now going to benefit England or the United States or Canada. That's not the direction we want resource flows to be flowing, right? So we do want to keep those people here, but that means creating futures for them, creating futures for their children, right? And that kind of job security, I think, is difficult, partially because of the economic situation, other issues, crime, schools, water, electricity. People are nervous about staying and they're trying to get a foot somewhere else. We may not be able to keep them full time, but maybe what we should be doing is trying to keep them invested in South Africa. Make it easy for people to come back and forth, make it easy for foreigners to come back and forth, so that labor market can be flexible, but that we keep the skills and the resources that we've invested in.
We have spoken extensively, Lawrence, about the role of government here, but I'm also keen to get your thoughts on the role of business, civil society, academia, and just like society as a whole in making sure that we're having the right conversations around immigration. Like we've mentioned, it is a polarizing, upsetting, conversation at present. Tempers certainly need to be lowered, and we need to start having a conducive conversation around this.
Yeah, I think this is one of the really key issues, is how do we even talk about this without, as you say, tempers getting up, without sort of either people xenophobic statements or really protectionist statements, and that's difficult. And we've worked with business to try to get them to speak a bit more loudly about this, about what they need to invest in South Africa, to grow the South African economy, to create South African jobs, but they're frightened to do so. They're frightened to speak publicly. They often feel that the government is closed to them, that as big business, they represent interests that the current government is not aligned to, unless there's a direct benefit to them, of course, and that it's difficult for them to advocate on this kind of issue because the populace doesn't want to hear it. Right now, we are seeing the kind of Pan-Africanism that President Mbeki promoted has been largely swept away. We're much more inward looking than we were 20 years ago. And that makes it very difficult to have this kind of conversation. I think if we can get some of the other things right around, job security, just general security, giving people a sense that there's a future in the country, it will become easier. People won't feel so frightened, they won't be afraid. But I think we do need all voices, civil society, business, universities, to try to have a discussion. And that's part of what we try to do by producing good research.
Well, that's all we have time for today. Keen to keep talking to you. Thank you so much for your invaluable contribution this afternoon. That was Loren Landau from the African Center for Migration and Society Department of the University of Witwatersrand.